Whoa, what? You've actually clicked on this? Okay. That's better. So yeah, I wanted to talk about Horus Rising with you today. That would be really great. So I've been into 40k lore for a little while now. When you first start off actually diving into the books and the lore, you get all excited about finally getting to that part that you've heard so much about and really reading about it for yourself and getting to process it. And then you get to a point where the amount that you have read outstrips what you've heard covered online or discussed with other people. And you happen across someone else's take on something that you have only read about, and it's awesome to get to hear what someone else has to say about something that already exists in your head. And I think that this is one of the real strengths of the Warhammer lore, because there's this back and forth process between yourself, the community, the material, and there's always something new to learn, to discover, or to discuss, or to change your mind on. And in the years that I've been having fun going through this process, I've noticed one standout moment in the lore that just doesn't seem to be discussed, or at least I haven't noticed it be discussed, and I'm really confused as to why. Because, in my opinion, the first 2 chapters of Horus Rising, the first book of the Horus Heresy saga, can really help us get a better understanding of Horus's fall to chaos. So, I thought I'd throw my hat in the ring and share with you the extraordinary intro to one of the best stories ever told. Alright, let me first provide some context to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Horus Rising is the first book of the Horus Heresy series. It's the entry point to the whole saga. It was written by Dan Abnett, praise be his name, and first published nearly 2 decades ago in 2006. If you've gotten into 40k during its more modern era, kinda like I have, it might feel like there are a million podcasts, shorts, long-form videos, short introductions to a million different subjects all contained within 40k. But you have to understand that it wasn't always like this. Although Games Workshop has always worked to make sure that the lore feels deep and rich, it just hasn't always been as fleshed out as it is now. See, the 40k lore has long pointed us to different things which contribute to the state of the galaxy in the 41st millennium. We've known since the 1980s that 10,000 years before that, Horus Lupercal, Primarch of the Luna Wolves and favored son of the Emperor, would betray his father, fall to the corruption of chaos, and burn the galaxy in the flames of a great galactic civil war. We've long known that following a devastating confrontation towards the end of the Siege of Terra, that Horus is ultimately destroyed, that the Emperor of Mankind becomes the carrying lord of the Imperium, and everything becomes inescapable war. But these events, as foundational as they may be, they weren't always described in detailed novel-length stories. They were often told in tabletop gaming material or referenced in a novel about, like, Imperial Guardsmen, or in magazine entries. And much like in some really good horror movies, where the movie won't show you the monster because the filmmakers know that whatever you come up with in your head is much more terrifying than anything that they could show you, this original way of storytelling made the stories feel authentic. The stories took on a mythical quality, and for a while, that was enough. It's only more recently that these foundational background lore stories have been given much more concrete form, thanks to a monumental project that the Black Library started in the early 2000s. Those mad lads decided that it was time to spill the ink and to give the world the Horus Heresy saga. We would know, in vastly more expansive detail, the incredible characters and insane events which would lead to the state of the galaxy in the 41st millennium, where there is only war. Now, quick little aside, I don't actually know how much guidance or leeway the Black Library gives its authors when they're developing a novel, but just for now, just for the sake of this video, I'm going to pretend that authors have full creative autonomy when writing a 40k novel. It might be inaccurate, but just bear with. So just for a moment, picture yourself as an author. Your name is Dan. You already have a successful history of writing for the Black Library. You know and understand the 40k lore really well. Thanks to you, a bunch of beloved stories and characters, like those from Gaunt's Ghosts and Eisenhorn, have already been brought to life. And what's important to note is these stories are wholly contained within the verse, by which I mean, although they might have an epic scale and all, their scope isn't able to in any way alter or affect the broader lore of the verse. But then, the maniacs at the Black Library announced to you that they have a long-term plan for a saga of epic proportion. It's going to cover the earliest moments of Horus's fall to chaos and the ensuing galactic scale civil war from the point of view of hundreds of fully fleshed out characters, all the way through to the verse-defining battle between the forces of the Imperium and Chaos on Terra. All of the little fundamental world-building stories, which are structurally integral to the setting, they have to be spun up into novel-length accounts. There's going to be many, many dozens of them, and it's going to require the work of many authors. So right off the bat, the project is kind of insane. But it doesn't end there. The project, it has the unique challenge of having to simultaneously feed the insatiable hunger for detail and knowledge that the 40k fanbase lore has, but it also has to make sure that it preserves the deep aura of the stories, so it doesn't ruin their mythical aspect. The stories are going to have to somehow show their hand like a magic trick, while still ensuring that the audience continues to see them as magical. That's going to be a really difficult balancing act to pull off. And then, they hit you with one of the most exciting announcements of your life. They want you to write the opening entry. You're the first in line to present for the class, and your work is going to be what sets the tone and direction of the entire absurd endeavor, and possibly determine whether the entire thing flops or is a huge success. Where are you even supposed to begin? And the cherry on top? It occurs to you that, in addition to all of that, which is already insane, almost everybody already knows how the story is going to end. And you have to write the start. How do you start a story that the audience already knows the ending to? For a while, you feel unsure, but you're undaunted and you persevere, and then finally, you crack it. What better way to start a story that everyone knows the end to than with the end? And with that idea, Dan Abnett completely nails the opening. The first 2 chapters of Horus Rising, the first 2 chapters of the Horus Heresy saga, are an obvious, heavy-handed foreshadowing of the final confrontation between the forces of Chaos and the Imperium on Terra, of the confrontation between Horus and the Emperor on the Vengeful Spirit. Anyone who has any basic knowledge of 40k lore should at least be able to recognize some of it. But this foreshadowing, it's not just fan service. It's an engaging narrative backdrop which will snare anyone's attention, which is also used to set up core characters, themes, and plot points, which will all help push the story through to the end of the saga. These first 2 chapters are Dan Abnett telling the audience, look, I know you know how this ends, but trust me, this is gonna be awesome. And then, by the Emperor, does he deliver? Let's begin. For the recap, I'll mostly stick to how things are presented in the book and keep any interpretation to a minimum. So if you're very familiar with this already, go ahead and skip to the next section of the video. I'll see you there. Now, we are in the 30th millennium, 2 centuries into the Great Crusade, which, up till now, has been led by the Emperor himself. Following the great triumph at Ullanor, the Emperor declared his Primarch son, Horus Lupercal, as War Master. The success of the Crusade was fully entrusted to him. This allowed the Emperor to return to Terra and continue his mysterious works behind a veil of secrecy. This abrupt departure from the Great Crusade left his sons a bit perplexed, but the Crusade continued on. The story opens with Garviel Loken, captain of the 10th Company of the Luna Wolves Space Marine Legion, recounting a cathartic story of wartime triumph and bloody vengeance at the request of his battle brothers. The tone is immediately set with the iconic opening lines of the novel, I was there. I was there the day Horus slew the Emperor. Garviel relays the story of how, as part of the 63rd expedition, the Luna Wolves had set upon a task of ensuring the compliance of a strangely familiar civilization. Located in a system of 9 planets orbiting a yellow sun, the throne world of the civilization, which named itself the Imperium, was located on the 3rd planet from its sun. From its capital, High City, ruled a powerful and long-lived emperor who had shepherded his people through the long night and into brighter days. He expressed delight at seeing other humans emerge from the dark, and that he was happy to be rejoining long-lost threads of human civilization. He declared that, as soon as the expedition bent the knee and swore fealty to him, they could get started rebuilding the galactic human empire in a great unification. This message, however misplaced, was so comical in its form that it actually was not taken too poorly by Horus. Obviously, the notion of bending the knee to this sub-emperor was laughable, but worlds with an enthusiasm for rejoining humanity could often turn out to be joyful and productive compliances. Thus, he decided to pursue diplomacy with this emperor. He sent his best man for the job, the most beloved of his sons, Hastur Sejanus. Sejanus was an exemplar among the Luna Wolves. He was a compelling politician, as he was a frightening warrior, admired and respected by all, favored of Horus. But to the expedition's shock, Sejanus is murdered. He is cut down by the elite guard of this false emperor, the so-called Invisibles. No reason is given. No one returns to explain the events that transpired. They are forced to presume that Sejanus must have offended the mad tyrant of the world when he suggested that there was another, far greater Imperium out there from which they had hailed. This loss devastated Horus and his legion, but they held to the hope that diplomacy could still win out. There was no need for bloodshed. Differences could be reconciled, if only the tyrant of this third world from the Yellow Sun could be made to see the truth. But it seemed that any insinuation which went against this emperor's worldview would be met with violence. Despite their best attempts, compromise was rejected, and intransigent demands of fealty were the only responses they would receive. It is after offering this civilization a final chance to comply that Horus ordered the attack. The Luna Wolves did as they do better than any other force in the galaxy: a rapid shock assault on the capital, High City, with Abaddon, captain of the First Company, leading the spear-tip strike. Compliance via decapitation. Though this civilization had well-prepared defenses, excellently trained soldiers, and had access to advanced technologies, some of which rivaled or even in certain ways surpassed those of the Imperium, they had nothing with which to resist the devastating blow of a Space Marine-led assault. Before long, the capital was invested by Horus's forces. The Luna Wolves would breach the citadel, allowing for regular troops to follow in their wake. Looming above them, god engines of the Mechanicum dominated the battle space. Although High City managed to put up a short fight, it was not long before their defenses were shattered. All that remained was to storm the palace, force the surrender of the mad tyrant, and avenge the death of Sejanus on the Invisibles. In this endeavor, the captain of the Luna Wolves would compete to see who could be the first to reach the seat of power, the throne room at the top of the highest spire. It is in this context that we are truly introduced to Garviel Loken, captain of the 10th Company, leading his forces into battle. An excellent leader and highly skilled combatant, Loken leads, fights, and problem solves his way through the battle. He pauses to aid fellow captains, to share moments of compassion and loss. He takes care of his men, and he exhibits remarkable martial skill and creative problem-solving abilities while pursuing his battlefield objectives. Under his expert command, Loken's forces are the first to breach the inner palace. They are caught in an ambush by the elite guard, the aptly named Invisibles. They wear light-bending armor, a tech which surpasses the Imperium's, making them nearly impossible to see. They wield a strange but powerful energy weapon capable of cutting down fully armored Space Marines, and this ambush catches Loken and his men off guard as they take heavy losses upon initial contact. But they quickly adapt. For all of their tech and ability, the Invisibles are simply unable to match the fighting prowess of the transhuman Astartes. Having regained the upper hand, Loken and his men reap a bloody toll on the Invisibles, enacting their vengeance for the murder of Sejanus. Loken fights his way up the spire of the palace, and is first to make it to the throne room. Large ascending concentric platforms encased by crystalline glass, offering a panoramic view of the raging battle below. At the center, a gigantic golden throne covered in arcane symbols sits empty. Loken finds an old man standing near the edge of the platform, gazing out at the devastation the 63rd expedition has wrought upon his world. The old man, presumably the Emperor, clearly poses no threat to Loken, so the captain treats him with civility. They engage in a short debate on the nature of the ongoing conflict, and Loken requests his surrender. The old man demands he be given the honor of surrendering to the overall commander of the fleet, Horus, in person. And in his nobility, Loken elects to allow him the honor. Interrupting, a squad of jetpacked equipped Space Marines land on the platform. They are the Catulan Reaver Squadron, an elite of Abaddon's first company, led by Captain Ekaddon. Seemingly much less inclined to be patient or noble, they make it known they do not care for any shows of decorum, and want to take the Emperor prisoner immediately. Why should they grant any honor to someone who is responsible for the murder of Sejanus? Too preoccupied with their contempt, they do not notice the hints that Loken starts to piece together. The old man is not the Emperor. The actual tyrant of the world is sitting on the throne, invisible. The request to surrender to the highest authority is a trap, an attempt to kill Horus. Loken realizes this and makes his way towards the throne, demanding to see the actual Emperor. The old man throws himself at Loken in an attempt to keep him away from the throne, only to be gleefully cut down by Ekaddon. Just as Loken reaches out to grab the shimmer of light betraying the presence of the Emperor, the throne emits an immense and continuous shockwave which slams into and throws the Space Marines off of their feet, sending several to tumble to their deaths. As Loken and Ekaddon hold on to anything they can find to avoid getting blown off of the highest spire, a teleport flare flashes. There appears Horus, who is unmoved by the continual outward surge of force. He simply aims his Stormbolter at the throne and fires a single shot, detonating it, ending the shockwave, and rendering the false Emperor a charred corpse still clutching the throne. Thus he proclaims, "So will I deal with all tyrants and deceivers." See, even though that was just a quick summary, I hope it was able to convey the amount of information, context, world building, plot setup, and foreshadowing that has been done in just 2 chapters. Alright, before we get to Horus, I want to cover the other 2 characters that appear in these 2 chapters. And let's start with Loken. I don't know this for 100% sure, I'm not even going to bother looking it up, but I'm pretty sure it's right. I do think this is the first appearance that Garviel Loken makes in the lore. He was invented for this book. What I'd like to mention before actually talking about the character himself is that Dan Abnett speaks through Loken in these first 2 chapters. Like, Dan Abnett knows you know the ending, and he's gonna joke about it with you. I know I've heard somewhere that some people suggest that John Grammaticus is a sort of self-insert for Dan Abnett, but do please consider the first lines of the first page of this book. It's Garviel recounting an event with the Sub-Imperium. I was there the day Horus slew the Emperor. It was a delicious conceit, and his comrades would chuckle at the sheer treason of it. Those are literally the first, second, and third sentences of the entire Horus Heresy. And that isn't just, Luna Wolves chuckling as they should at how silly that sounds. It's Dan Abnett with a huge smile on his face, sitting you down, giggling to himself, and just beckoning you to listen. He's inviting you to have a laugh with him and relish in this brilliant start that he's thought of. And again, he knows you already know the end to the story. He even goes on to write, Loken was always careful to make sure his audience properly understood the irony of his story. To me, it sounds like Dan being like, look, I know it sounds funny, that's on purpose, just read on. And what's really cool about this is that both someone who is completely new to the lore and someone who knows everything can enjoy these first 2 chapters. By function of how the story is told and the warnings you are given, even someone who doesn't see the parallels is going to read into this a bit more than they would the average start to another novel. Now let's move on to Loken himself. It doesn't take long to understand that Loken isn't just any other Space Marine. He's a man of principles, a man of action. He evokes traits that we associate with the honorable old guard, He actually believes in the ideals that he's fighting for. He holds utmost loyalty for his Primarch Horus, and he cares for his battle brothers, and he's really proud of his legion. But he's also humble in his way. He's a model warrior and captain, and he's drawn the attention of Horus and the Mournival, who seem to hold him in high esteem. Despite how quote-unquote cool he is, he's so well-rounded and so stalwart that he's nearly boring. Though, given the journey that awaits him, we know that Loken is the furthest thing from boring. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. What matters for now is that these 2 chapters establish the incredible caliber of individual that can exist in a legion. Unlike Ekaddon and the Raptor Squad, which join him in the throne room, he truly believes everything he has been taught. There exist Space Marines like him who have heard the lectures of the iterators, processed the lessons, and come to hold those values of the Imperium deep in their bones. One can only hope that those values
are beyond reproach.
There's a particularly telling conversation that Loken has with Malkador's analog. It is over. I can see you've been watching the progress from up here. You must know that. The Imperium of Man will triumph over all its enemies, the man replied. Yes, said Loken. Absolutely it will. You have my promise. The man faltered. He did not quite understand. Am I addressing the so-called Emperor? Loken asked. He had switched off and sheathed his sword, but kept his bolter up to cover the robed figure. So-called, the man echoed. So-called. You cheerfully blaspheme in this royal palace. The Emperor is the Emperor undisputed, savior and protector of the race of man. You are some impostor, some evil daemon. I am a man like you. The other scoffed. You are an impostor, made like a giant, malformed and ugly. No man would wage war upon his fellow man like this. He gestured disparagingly at the scene outside. Your hostility started this, Loken said calmly. You would not listen to us or believe us. You murdered our ambassadors. You brought this upon yourself. We are charged with the reunification of mankind throughout the stars in the name of the Emperor. We seek to establish compliance amongst all the fragmentary and disparate strands. Most greet us like the lost brothers we are. You resisted. You came to us with lies. We came with truth. Your truth is obscenity. Sir, the truth itself is amoral. It saddens me that we believe the same words, the very same ones, but value them so differently. That difference has led directly to this bloodshed. The elderly man sagged, deflated. You could have left us alone. What? Loken asked. If our philosophies are so much at odds, you could have passed us by and let us live our lives, unviolated. Yet you did not. Why? Why did you insist on bringing us to ruin? Are we such a threat to you? Because the truth, Loken began, is amoral, so you said. But in serving your fine truth, Invader, you make yourself immoral. Loken was surprised to find he did not quite know how to answer. He took a step forward and said, I request you surrender to me, sir. It's obvious that Loken truly believes in the cause. He treats his prisoner with respect, despite his part in the death of Sejanus and the forcing of a war. They dialogue. Loken presents the imperial truth, and doubtless could engage in an even deeper debate with the old man on its merits. Despite having spent most of his life as a line soldier in a galactic crusade, at least I assume he spent most of his life as a line soldier, he's probably sufficiently educated and practiced in debate to win. It is a testament to the teachings of the iterators and the solid foundation of the belief. But despite this, he's thrown off guard when the old man rebuts him with, in serving your fine truth, Invader, you make yourself immoral. Even if you are right about everything, even if your sciences reach further than all others, even if your philosophy is better thought out than anyone else's, even if you set out with the best of intentions, you can lose the moral high ground depending on the method you use to spread your teachings to others. In brutalizing this civilization, Loken and the Imperial Truth have lost the moral high ground. And what I love about that passage is that it shows Loken here as a prime example of the effect of Imperial propaganda, and really good Imperial propaganda at that. It shows the effect that the iterators and the Imperial Truth can have. Many Space Marines of the Great Crusade are highly intelligent, not all of them, but most, and they're often provided with an extraordinary education. Not only on the subject of war, many of them are educated in philosophy, the arts. I'd bet some of them even know social sciences. But they can eradicate civilizations without bringing their own education to bear to critically analyze their own actions. This indoctrination is a part of what makes a Space Marine such an effective force for the Crusade. They can do everything they do. They can live, fight, act, build, whatever, without ever realizing the cognitive dissonance between their intent and some of their actions. Like, really, it's in the text. Loken is unable to respond to the old man, to a pretty basic moral conundrum. He might have been able to engage him on, the realities of the nature of the universe, or convince him on the best path forward for the survival of humanity, or to demonstrate to him the philosophical reasoning which justifies the necessity for the Great Crusade. But a simple rebuke on the manner of how he spreads this truth. And Loken is tripped up. Loken, like many other Space Marines that we will come to know and love in this series, are these warrior sages with just a huge blind spot. And that makes them incredibly interesting characters. As we work through the Heresy series, the question of the morality of the Great Crusade is going to be continually brought up, and how Loken and others respond to this and develop their answers is going to be one of the most thought-provoking aspects of the saga. The last thing that I want to cover about Loken that these two chapters make really clear is his pride. Despite his restraint and dedication to the Imperial truth, Loken is an immensely proud man. More specifically, he's immensely proud of his legion. He sees nothing but strength and beauty in Horus, and he holds Abaddon in such high esteem that he's almost left starstruck by a quick Vox conversation with him. And actually, he seems to fanboy about members of the Mournival quite a lot. Just listen to his description of Sejanus. A beautiful man, Loken would say, building his tale. No finer figure in Mark IV plates than Hastur Sejanus. Yeah, but seriously, to hammer the point home, the second chapter ends on this conversation between Loken and Mercedes Olaton. "May I ask you a question?" Mercedes Olaton said. Loken had taken a robe down from a wall peg and was putting it on. "Of course." "Could we not just have left them alone?" "No. Ask a better question." "Very well. What is he like?" "What is who like, lady?" he asked. "Horus." "If you have to ask, then you've not met him," he said. "No, I haven't yet, Captain. I've been waiting for an audience. But still, I would like to know what you think of Horus." "I think he is War Master," Loken said. His tone was stone hard. "I think he is the master of the Luna Wolves and the chosen proxy of the Emperor, praise be his name, in all our undertakings. He is the first and foremost of all Primarchs, and I think I take offense when a mortal voices his name without respect or title." "Oh," she said. "I'm sorry, Captain. I meant no." "I'm sure you didn't, but he is War Master Horus. You're a remembrancer. Remember that." So, Loken and the Luna Wolves are not lacking for pride. How that pride is managed, though, will be key, but let's put a pin in it for now. We move on to Ekaddon as a representation of Abaddon. Then, we have the conversation with Ekaddon, captain of the 1st Company Catulan Reaver Squad, Abaddon's boys. Now, this interaction is critical because it immediately shows us the stark contrast that can exist between two members of the same legion. And not just any two members, two captains who probably have over a century of service each. While Loken intends on honoring the old man's request and agrees to provide him with the opportunity to surrender to Horus, Ekaddon and his men are not so inclined to give him this grace, and it's not because they could tell that there was a trap being prepared. They are ready to seek vengeance for Sejanus, and they do not care what the old man has to ask. Interestingly enough, they are ready to defer to Loken and to allow him to accept the surrender, in part because he outranks them, but probably more so because they clearly respond to a warrior's rights to reap the benefits of his accomplishments. Loken is the first of the throne room, so to him go the spoils. Clearly, they are not without a creed. Though there seems to be more of a warrior code than any sort of love for the Imperial truth. As a matter of fact, when Loken asks, "Didn't the Emperor, praise be his name, teach us to always be magnanimous in our victory?" Ekaddon responds with, "The Emperor, praise be his name, is not with us." We clearly see a delineation separating two schools of thought existing in the same legion. For there to be such a disagreement between two captains of the same legion doesn't bode well, and we're left to wonder, have there been such ideological differences for the whole crusade? Were those differences born when the Emperor took his leave for Terra after Ullanor, or were they just exacerbated? Can a warrior creed of Chthonia coexist peacefully with a devotion to the Imperial truth? We often hear that the Emperor was on some nebulous deadline over the course of the unification in the Great Crusade. This led to many shortcuts being taken in the name of expediency, and many in the community point to a rush production of Space Marines, which leads to issues of subpar training, recruitment, implants, and gene seed instability, and just an overall degraded quality Space Marine, because the Emperor took the approach of quantity over quality. But I think what we sometimes overlook might be the shortcuts in the moral selection and education of candidates, in the quality of their indoctrination. You know, the Emperor once had another army, one that won him the reunification of Terra. It was the Thunder Warriors who crushed the warlords and techno-barbarians of ancient Terra beneath the Emperor's boot. Those fighters were augmented with prototype equipment and crude biomancy, often resulting in a savagely strong and fearsome warrior, but who would suffer from instabilities and be incapable of nuance. The Thunder Warriors were a blunt tool for the conquest of Terra, but to win the stars, the Emperor would need a much more flexible soldier, one gifted with great intelligence and noblesse, one capable of inspiring reason and wielding diplomacy just as much as they did fear and violence. He would need warriors like Sejanus and Loken. So when you hear the words of Ekaddon and his subordinates, we're forced to realize that this standard is not being met for every Space Marine. For people to consider the rushed fabrication process for Space Marines and to only really come away with a few bad gene seed problems, well, I think that means they're missing something important. For Lunawolves like Ekaddon and, as we'll know later, Abaddon, their personal ethos and warrior creed, possibly due to their upbringing on Chthonia, clearly outweighs their devotion to the imperial truth and to the Emperor. While this doesn't take away their accomplishments and prowess during the Great Crusade, it clearly shows a deviation from the Emperor's intentions. This sort of subversion is what possibly could have been avoided if the Emperor hadn't so rushed the development and fabrication of Space Marines for the Great Crusade. Alright, now just a little quick fire round on the other characters that are here. There's Captain Torgadon, member of the Mournival, a man of mighty laughter and idiot tricks. There's Brother Sergeant Nero Vipus, commander of 3rd Squad 10th Company, Locasta Tactical Squad, who is Loken's oldest and truest friend. There's also Brother Sergeant Jubal, 1st Squad 10th Company, Hellbore Tactical Squad. He's kind of just there for now. Cedere is undescribed in these chapters, but he is there and used to convey this banger: no fighting force in the galaxy could ever hope to match the legions, unless the stars went out and madness ruled and lawful sense turned upside down. For, as Cedere had once said, the only thing that can beat an Astartes is another Astartes, and they had all laughed at that. The impossible was nothing to be scared of. And then there's Mercedes Olaton, official remembrancer, who is a very interesting character and an extremely important one, so you might be surprised that I don't talk about her more in this one, but A, she has very little page time in these 2 chapters, B, in those pages she only really serves as a foil to learn more about Loken, C, her introduction is one of the only things I don't like about these first 2 chapters, so D, we'll get to her in another video. What I want to discuss now requires a more general view of the heresy, as well as pretty specific knowledge from the End and the Death. So if that matters to you, and you haven't read any of that yet, you've been warned, there are some spoilers ahead. But honestly, I wouldn't worry about it. So, the theory I want to submit is that this compliance with the 63rd Expedition is early evidence of the true beginning of Horus's fall. And before I start, I have to concede, in all likelihood, the structure and the heavy foreshadowing of these first chapters, it's just a writing choice made by Dan Abnett, and it's a literary tool used to produce a solid and attention-grabbing introduction to kick off the whole story, so maybe it's not the most brilliant place to read too much into the text, but it's in the canon, so fair is fair, and I will now proceed with rabid red string association. The parallels between this compliance and events that take place in the far future, like on the Siege of Terra and stuff, are many, and the connections you can draw between them and the rest of the story are downright Tzeentchian. For the fun of it, and for the sake of maybe those who aren't in so deep into the lore that maybe they've missed these things, I'm going to run through a list of some of the parallels that can be drawn. Some of them are more tenuous than others, but I'd argue that they're all valid. Number 1, Horus and his forces arrive in the system with an intervention of the warp. In Horus Rising, the warp storm pushes the 63rd Expedition there, somewhat akin to how Horus's forces initially arrive in the Sol system at the beginning of the Siege of Terra with the blessing of warp powers. 2. The system has 9 planets orbiting a yellow sun, just like the solar system on Terra, except for maybe, depending on your stance for classifying Pluto as a planet, it's not a planet anymore, so But, this was written in 2006. 3. The capital is located on the 3rd planet from the sun, much like Terra is the 3rd planet from Sol. 4. The system is ruled by a long-lived emperor who proclaims himself Emperor of Mankind and who claims to have shepherded his people through the age of warp storms and through the age of strife. The Emperor on Terra also goes by the title Emperor of Mankind and likely worked through the age of strife to unify Terra. 5. This emperor claims he plans to reunite mankind across the stars. He calls this project the Great Scheme of Rebuilding. Naturally, the Emperor on Terra already engaged in this reunification via the Great Crusade. 6. Regardless of his intentions, the Emperor's methods are steeped in violence and arrogance. We see this from the murder of Sejanus and the intransigent demands for fealty despite the cost of violence. True to form, the real Emperor on Terra also doesn't hesitate to use violence to achieve his goals, and although this might be a heretical thought, the ultimate outcome of the Horus Heresy might be a good indicator that he did indeed suffer from some amount of arrogance. 7. This sub-imperium and its emperor seem determined to maintain a certain viewpoint about the universe, namely that the greater imperium and the emperor don't exist. They certainly insist on acting like they're unaware of this reality. What with all the demands of fealty they keep making? This is kind of similar to how the emperor of the real imperium acts like he knew nothing about the realities of chaos and the warp, electing to build his entire empire on propaganda that just ignores these things. 8. This one might be weak, but it does seem intentional. Beyond vague proclamations, we know next to nothing about this false emperor. Much is the same thing for the Emperor on Terra. 9. Horus's legions will siege the planet, just as they will siege Terra. 10. Horus and the Legion see this act as a vengeance upon the false emperor who has betrayed their trust by murdering Sejanus, and who demands fealty but deserves none. This is ultimately how they will come to see their own emperor, for as he, from their perspective at least, betrays their trust and demonstrates that he is not worthy of their loyalty. 11. During the battle, Abaddon's elite Terminator squadron, the Justarin, armored in polished black battle plate, as opposed to the Luna Wolves' traditional white and black trim, are described as seemingly belonging to some other Black Legion. Much later, past the events of the Siege of Terra and the Scouring, Abaddon will become commander of the most powerful Chaos Space Marine organization, the Black Legion. 12. The false Emperor's elite guard, the Invisibles, actually pose somewhat of a threat to the Space Marines. These are paralleled by the Emperor on Terra's elite guard, the Custodians, although Custodians are much more dangerous to an Astartes than just kind of posing a threat. 13. Loken has moral conflicts with Ekaddon and his squad, so odds are he would have conflicts with many other Luna Wolves too. These moral disagreements will endure throughout the saga, all the way to the death in the end. 14. An old man who may as well be confused for the Emperor at first, will die for his Emperor. This old man is an analog from Malcador, a wise, powerful figure in the Imperium, literally the right-hand man of the Emperor, who eventually sacrifices himself to buy his Emperor more time. 15. This Emperor sits on a golden throne of great power. The Emperor on Terra also has a mysterious and powerful golden throne. 16. Horus remains on his ship above and only engages at the last minute. This will be similar to how the Siege of Terra and the confrontation between Horus and the Emperor will play out. 17. Horus teleports from his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, to the throne room to confront the Emperor. This is a mirror to how, towards the end of the Siege of Terra, the Emperor on Terra will teleport from the Golden Throne to the Vengeful Spirit to confront Horus. 18. Loken is present for this final confrontation, much as he will be present for the battle between Horus and the Emperor on Terra. 19. Abaddon is nearby, but not present for the final confrontation, much as he will be nearby, but not present for the battle between Horus and the Emperor on Terra. 20. We're almost there. Horus kills the false Emperor, as he will try to do to his father, the Emperor on Terra. 21. This Emperor ends up a smoldering carcass on the Golden Throne, just as the true Emperor on Terra will too, though the one on Terra is slightly more alive. Alright, I think that's enough for now. I'll end it there, but let me know in the comments if you catch any of the ones I left out, and maybe one I haven't noticed. So, finally to the point. let's agree to say that all these events I just listed off are more than just foreshadowing. The coincidences are too numerous and too specific. It's way too heavy-handed to be foreshadowing, especially from an excellent author like Dan Abnett. Unless we further explore another mechanism, like, some half-baked idea about like an echo to the past from future events, back-propagating through the past. I don't know, I'm just making this shit up. Like, whatever this is, it seems to be intentional. It seems like it can only be a planned event. Additionally, the intervention of the Dark Powers seems more than likely because the 63rd Expedition only stumbled on the Pseudo-Imperium system because they were forced to alter their course from their initial route. There was a sudden and etheric storm, later declared providential by Malachurst. And honestly, when it comes to a being whose actions and experiences are so pivotal to the fate of the galaxy, can we really attribute this to chance? So these events aren't just foreshadowing. And if this is the work of chaos, it doesn't actually change much for the whole story. After all, this story doesn't take place very long before all that business with the Intrex, courtesy of everyone's most hated Erebus. And if Erebus is at work, that means that chaos has already started making moves. And since the timeline is so close to those events, there is no reason to doubt that chaos has already chosen Horus as their champion by the time the 63rd Expedition stumbles across this system, and they are trying to get his ass. So yeah, it's just that every time I see a video explaining the start of Horus's corruption, I hear about the Intrex, the corrupted blade, Erebus fooling Horus during his coma, and everything else, all of which are essential, but I never hear mention of this first compliance of the series. I understand leaving it out of videos which are more aimed at those who are beginners to the lore, because it genuinely can make things really confusing, but I've never heard anyone discuss this event. Please do note though, I am not saying no one has ever talked about it. Odds are, multiple YouTubers I watch have made videos about them, and I just coincidentally have missed them. I also went out of my way to not look up anything about this while I was making this video to make sure that my ideas remained my own. But that is what motivated me to make this video. I found an opportunity to share my enjoyment for something I really enjoy, and also throw in my 2 cents regarding Horus's fall and how it should be discussed. In one sentence, I think that to ignore the first 2 chapters of Horus Rising is to ignore some pretty compelling vectors by which we might better understand Horus's fall. And why would we do that? Through the foreshadowing of the first 2 chapters, I believe that at least some of the intentions of the powers of chaos can be clearly divined. To start, having Horus and his legion defeat an Imperium and kill an Emperor, so similar to their own, implants in their minds that it is within their power to do so with their own Imperium and Emperor. And I believe that that is the principal objective of this manipulation. This interaction with a sub-Imperium, it's a sort of sandbox, like a sandbox playground, to get Horus and the Luna Wolves thinking about the injustices of the Emperor. It creates associations in Horus's mind between the strict and unexplained actions of his father and the cost that those decisions inflict on him and his legion. It also suggests the disgust that he experiences at the idea of serving the undeserving. After all, a big pretext for the heresy is the encroaching civilian control of the Imperium. Many Astartes and several Primarchs see this as their work being handed over to undeserving beings that they consider beneath them, or as an erasure of their contributions. Their spilled blood and their sacrifice is what won the Imperium the galaxy, and now it's being handed over to lesser beings? They see an emperor who has abandoned them but continues to demand loyalty, who denigrates them by handing over the fruits of their transhuman labor to mortal men. So, they begin to resent him. They see him as arrogant, absurd in his demands, and undeserving of his rule. The confrontation with the Sub-Imperium is priming or reinforcing this viewpoint in Horus and the Luna Wolves. After all, when they stumbled onto this civilization, what did they encounter? An undeserving emperor making grand claims, demanding their unconditional fealty under threat of violence. Compared to them, Horus knows of a galaxy-defining reality, and that there is another much grander Imperium led by a man so powerful he may as well be a god. How did this minor civilization react to that information? They suppressed the knowledge through violent means, going so far as to butcher diplomats and go to war, all to maintain a seemingly senseless veil of ignorance. As far as we can tell, the Sub-Imperium has nothing akin to Astartes, and certainly nothing worth contending with the Primarch. Who is this Emperor to speak to them like that? Despite engaging with this civilization peacefully and with the best of intentions, they are greeted with murder and betrayal. Everything about this situation serves to push the Legion to reconsider their relationship with the greater Imperium and the real Emperor. The other aspect to this is the loss of Sejanus, and I think it serves a dual purpose. First, it contributes to untethering Horus from reality, and second, it makes him fear being able to go to speak to or confront his father about his misgivings. After all, Sejanus has been with Horus for centuries, and he helped keep him grounded. As a member of the Mournival, and honestly, undoubtedly the most respected one too, Sejanus wasn't just an advisor on Horus, he was a check. Demigod strength probably gets to your head, and Horus was wise enough to recognize that. He relied on the Mournival, and undoubtedly he relied on Sejanus, who kept him tethered to reality. Sejanus was a check on Horus's ego, almost a part of his consciousness. Removing that part of his consciousness is the beginning of the corruption. Also, they gave Erebus the opportunity to disguise himself as Sejanus in Horus's trance to more easily manipulate him. There isn't a better disguise for that other than maybe the Emperor himself, but that doesn't make sense, and honestly there's probably something that would say no one could imitate the Emperor, and yeah. So, though it only comes later, without Sejanus, the Mournival ceased to be a check on Horus, and instead began to serve only as an extension of his will, or as tools to fool those around Horus, actors to help him seem reasonable. But the other thing that the death of Sejanus accomplishes is that it subtly implants in Horus's mind that to attempt to negotiate with the Emperor would only lead to loss and pain. Imagine a world in which Horus had returned to Terra with some degree of corruption and disillusionment about the Emperor, but still enough loyalty and confidence to try to talk with the Emperor before resorting to violence. Well, it's possible that in a universe like that, the Emperor might have been able to turn him back to his light, but chaos couldn't allow that to happen. Hence, the murder of Sejanus, as soon as he attempts dialogue. This better poisons the mind of Horus against dialogue and diplomacy, and prevents him from peacefully resolving his conflicts with the Emperor. All in all, though all of the elements I mentioned work independently, there is a greater unifying motive, and only some of it is speculation and headcanon. This is a coordinated dance specifically designed to prey on Horus's pride. Implanting the achievability of overthrowing a long-lived emperor who sits on a golden throne in Horus's mind is toying with his sense of pride in his abilities. Letting Horus experience refusing oaths of fealty to an emperor who clearly does not deserve his respect and does nothing but betray his goodwill is an exercise in defending his pride. Showing an Imperium ruled by lesser men unworthy of Horus's pity, who treat him with such disregard that he is obligated to unleash his legion and burn its throne world down, is playing on his pride. The absence of Sejanus is the absence of a check on Horus's pride. Subconscious suggestion that dissuades Horus from returning to Terra to consult with his father about his grievances succeeds by utilizing the fear of loss that Horus could never admit to because of his pride. And in the end, it'll be Horus's twisted pride that motivates the heresy. See how I brought it all together? Isn't that mind-blowing? Now, admittedly, this is nothing new. Horus's arrogance, being the means through which chaos was able to initially sink its tendrils into him, is well known. But I think that ignoring these first two chapters is pretty unfortunate. Engaging with them is pretty fun, and you should walk away with a bit better understanding of Horus, and a whole lot better understanding of someone else. Because yes, this video was a trap. It was mostly about Garviel Loken. But the fun thing is that the more you know about one, the more you see in the other. True to 40k form, to better understand the son, you need to take a look at the father. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching to the end. Oh crap, they're here. Sorry, don't mind them. They've just been a bit extra since they found out what the Terminus Decree is. Fine. I guess I'll just go finish reading Heir of Ruin. You, though, you probably know too much now. My bad.